So what I love about the 5S Plus Safety program is that it's applied learning. I'll teach them a tool and we'll apply it. The 5 S's, there's an activity for every S to get them from their current state to their future state. And, I have worked in so many different spaces. I have so many before and after photos. People don't even believe it's the same space that we've worked in.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
Today on Power Supply, we speak with Monique Albornoz, principal owner at 5S Space Innovations. You may all know about Lean, but today, within that framework, you're going to learn about how to organize yourself with 5S Space Optimization. It's a process that can really bring the culture together and then create a sustainable solution that's going to make everybody's lives easier. And Monique is going to tell us all about it today, Garry.
Justin, I am really excited to hear from Monique today and talk about her 5S projects and really pick her brain on what she's seen as best practices, pulling in the key stakeholders, infection, HR, regulatory, and just really seeing what that applied learning really makes things happen with the healthcare arena. And obviously the number one point I think, we were going to hear from her is the patient-centered focus. It's all about the patient. So I know we've had some initial discussions. I'm really excited to see what she has to say today. So looking forward to having Monique.
All right, don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back after a short break.
I'm Hays Waldrop.
This is Garry Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Monique Albornoz, principal owner at 5S Space Innovations. And if you are tuning into this episode of Power Supply and you're not sure what we're talking about when we say 5S Space Optimization, you are going to find out today. Monique, thank you so much for coming on the show. You got referred by a past guest. We connected for a little bit and you've got great energy and something really important to talk to everybody about today. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, and I definitely want to spread the message about how to make healthcare safer for everyone, including myself and yourself and all the patients and their families that arrive.
Well, a lot of focus on that. And if you've been in healthcare, you should have been focusing on it all along, and you probably were, but never greater focus than now. But it requires all of us to work together. And while everybody is really familiar with Lean, we're going to dive into I don't know if the right word is nuance, but we're going to go into a nuanced aspect of Lean today. But before we even do that, we like to have a little fun kicking this off. Why don't you talk a little bit about your background and let everybody get to know you?
Sure. So I was born and raised in New York City. I come from a family of healthcare providers, which is the reason why I'm in healthcare. Growing up, I would always, visit my mom at the VA, and I would see a lot of the environmental issues and the complaints and the near misses. And so I always wanted to do something to give back because I never had the stomach to be a direct care provider myself. So this was my second best thing, to support the people that support taking care of the patients. So that's kind of my background. I have some background in real estate, and I know that I pursued my Lean and Six Sigma certifications. I'm a master black belt, but I also pursued getting an education in healthcare facilities planning and design because it's really important. A lot of people don't realize how workflows and environments of care are interdependent, and there's an effect on patient outcomes when the environment is not organized and set in a way that helps them to best recover.
That's great. Monique, I have a quick question to ask. Obviously, New York you mentioned, but is there anything that you learned during COVID, during the last 18 months or so? Was it a hobby, a passion? Was it a TV show? Was there something that you did that maybe you never done before?
I think thanks to COVID, I learned how to cook in a different fashion than I normally cook. And now I'm more geared toward being a vegetarian, which is something I've never done in my entire life. And I think it had to do with just being home more and having the ability to have more time to multitask. So the ability to work from home more frequently gave me a chance to explore the kitchen in a different way, because I used to be a huge carnivore and it was always fish, chicken, and steak. And now it's like, chicken tikka, but it's not really chicken tikka. It's cauliflower tikka. So I think my cooking has helped me. This new road of cooking has been a passion, like in the sense that it's new for me. I like it and I like to cook.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And Garry, that's going to be hard for you because I know you eat every animal that walks the face of the earth, don't you?
That's because I live in the beautiful Northwest in the Idaho mountains, and I just breathe fresh air every day. Doesn't mean I've been cooking broccoli and more cauliflower as well because multitasking. Monique and I are probably going to share recipes when we're done. So Hays, so whatever. Okay, so don't assume, brother.
Okay, enough of that. Let's hop into this. Who's next? Let's go.
I love it.
Well, let's get an introduction to 5S space optimization. You teed it up really well, Monique. You said, things have to be organized in such a way, but, the constraints on healthcare finances, resources have never been greater. And I can see where space optimization is so incredibly important to helping us just, continue to make progress while we're under duress in healthcare.
I agree. And a lot of things were highlighted during the pandemic. But let me just give you a quick background about what the 5S plus safety program is, because it is derived from Lean. It's their workspace optimization methodology. And the 5 S's are derived from 5 Japanese words, which are to sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. The idea is that if you have these 5 principles active in a working space, it leads to safety. So what has been highlighted in the pandemic, as far as healthcare facility planning and design, there's a big focus on improving the respite spaces for the clinicians. One of the easiest and least expensive things you can do for your clinicians is organize their clean supply rooms and their equipment spaces to support them while they're giving patient care.
So that one last S, and I might be jumping the gun here a little bit, but that sustainability piece has really come to the forefront. But I'm interested because when we're talking about sustainability lately, it has to do with supplies and, something like a concept of just in time is not necessarily sustainable when there's literally, resource constraints, right? But we're talking about something different with sustainability. We're talking about, space optimization. So I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but how does sustainability kind of factor in here? Because I think it'll be a good way to kind of drive our conversation forward.
So the sustainability piece, one is the most challenging piece because, once you optimize a space, you design it with the clinicians, they have to maintain the space. And, healthcare is fluid. Things change over time. But if you give them the 5S plus safety framework, they've learned the tools. They become empowered to make those changes that will continue to support them while they're giving patient care. So the thing about the 5S is that you can't have a designer design it for you. You have to work with the people that occupy the space. You teach them the tools and they tell you, all right, based on what I've learned, this is how I want it organized because this is how I access my supplies. You used to be a nurse, so you know that you access products and equipment in systems to deliver that patient care at the bedside. And that's also the biggest challenge is getting those supplies as close to the bedside as possible because, with the pandemic, you have droves of people leaving healthcare. So you're left with less staff and they have to do more and they can't be running from place to place and leaving their patients unattended. Not in times of the pandemic.
I've seen those maps before, and I'm not sure. I think it happened during a Kaizen event where you're literally drawing lines where the staff are moving throughout the day. It's not really a process map, but it's showing that inefficiency, right? We're going over here, then we're going over here, and you might be walking an extra 4 miles a day just in small increments, and you didn't realize how much unproductive time that was creating. So when you talk about getting those supplies as close to the patient patient and, the end users that are going to deliver them. That's such a key point. So before we get totally down that path, because I know you're going to tell us a lot more about that, I kind of assume that not a lot of people know about this framework within Lean, 5S space optimization. So what do you think is the current adoption rate? Because everybody knows about Lean, right?
Yes.
What's the adoption rate in healthcare for this?
I feel like the 5S Plus Safety program has been slowly adopted by healthcare, which for me is super surprising in the sense that every other industry has the 5S Plus Safety framework. In fact, some people refer to it as visual merchandising because they use it in supermarkets all the way to NASCAR. Because in a NASCAR race, they need to fix that car when it comes in for repair within 10 seconds, because if not, they could lose the race. What's shocking to me is that healthcare shouldn't be the one slowly adapting. They should be the ones launching this, because seconds can be the difference between life and death.
Good point. This adoption rate, I think, is key, Justin, especially with what's been going on the last 18 months, even more so. So it's at the framework. And I know I've been in some of these 5S projects and the iceberg and what's below the iceberg and the whole lean discussion with those engineers like yourself. I call you an engineer. I hope that's okay. And
that's fine.
That's perfect. But as a part of that, who do you work with typically in the hospitals? Who are you pulling together? Who are the key stakeholders that you're seeing most times pulling in together to make this work and getting those supplies close to the patient bedside, as you talked about before?
So in order to do this effectively, you want to grab as many stakeholders as possible. But what tends to happen is that they just grab the stakeholders who are immediately affected within the clinical settings. So we're dealing a lot with the nurses. We're dealing a lot with the supply chain. But to have a more robust program, you should have people from regulatory, infection prevention and control, human resources. There's a lot of people who have responsibility for what happens in a clinical space, even though they don't live there every day. And since other people don't see them every day, they're usually left on the side until something goes wrong. And then they have to do some sort of regulatory visit and resolve some compliance issue. But if you get as many people on the front end as possible, you have a more robust program. And it helps significantly in sustaining and having everyone with a vested interest in keeping it up to snuff with the regulations and the maintenance and the organization.
So, Monique, that's really well said. And that's in the best case scenario. But I'd love to hear a story or two about you walking into a system, to a hospital, to a place that wasn't perfect. Can you kind of give us some ideas of what that looks like?
So what I can tell you is that it looks like most of the hospitals in the tri-state area. There's a lot of hospitals that have the beautiful name, and when you go inside their equipment rooms or their supply rooms, it's surprising that people are able to find anything or replenish anything from a supply chain perspective. Because in the tri-state area, real estate is very precious. It's valuable, and there's just not enough. Most organizations rather give the space to give patient care, not realizing that ancillary spaces that support that patient care need to be just as thought through in order to be effective, so that they can have all the items needed to deliver whatever service they're offering on that unit. So I would be lying if I told you I walk into hospitals and, they're all, spacious with everything organized with top-notch storage solutions. That's not what I walk into. I walk into a lot of places that probably look less organized than your clothes closet.
Monique, I've seen this a little bit, and I'm hearing what you're saying. How is the buy-in? Do some people, when you bring that in and you start bringing that process in and start talking about it, are they skeptical? Do they feel threatened? Or are they ready to buy in now? How do you set that up, to Hays' point, to make sure that you've got great buy-in with them? Because I think sometimes, it's like coming into someone's house. You're coming to someone's house and you're trying to set them up. You may have buy-in from senior leadership, and we've got to get this figured out. But you feel that. How do you get buy-in with the key stakeholders?
So you get the leadership all aligned so that you can have access to their staff. So what I love about the 5S Plus Safety program is that it's applied learning. I'll teach them a tool and we'll apply it. The 5 S's, there's an activity for every S to get them from their current state to their future state. And, I have worked in so many different spaces. I have so many before and after photos. People don't even believe it's the same space that we've worked in. And the beauty of it is there's nothing for me to, sell you. You'll see the photographs. You'll look at your room. You're involved. You and your team are designing. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just showing you the tools. It's like, here are all the ingredients. Now go cook, right? So they make their own recipe.
So you say you and your team. Who's on the team?
So normally what I've only had access to based on availability, because a lot of these clinicians are giving patient care, have been nurses, patient care technicians, supply chain, replenishment staff. I've had access to maybe a few regulatory folks here and there to do some initial tours so that the team knows what they need to incorporate as part of their future space designs. But it's really me with a handful of frontline staff, clinicians. Sometimes I might get a physician here and there on a day off if they even have one these days. But yeah, it's normally the nurses and the business associates along with a handful of supply chain folks at the front lines doing the training and then remodifying the room layouts and stocking the inventory and installing the visual management needed.
All right, let me quick question here. Maybe to add to that is, what kind of timeline are we talking about here? If you come in, as far as meeting with everybody, discerning what's important, how long is that going to take for you to actually implement some of these changes?
So I just recently did a project, and it was safe to say between contracting and execution was about 6 months. So 6 months. And even though you're not on the floor every day, there's activities that are taking place every week, right? Because there's time that you contract and you get everybody on the same page. There's times when you have to set up training. And so you're doing little cohorts, groups of 6 people at a time. Because of the pandemic, you can just train a handful of people. So you're going unit by unit. And then you're doing the exercises. So 1 week, this unit might have 6 hours in sorting the items that are needed versus what's not needed. Then the week later, we're going to organize the room by categories so that they can access their supplies. The week after that, supply chain is installing their labels and we're doing the visual management. And then the week after that, we might be teaching the sustainment piece so that supply chain and the clinicians can communicate on a daily basis as to what's going on with back orders. What are they running low on so that when they come back, they can replenish.
So I got to think that when you're trying to get that engagement, especially because there are so many different stakeholders who may already have their own cultural dynamics at play.
Yes.
Right?
No.
Saying that softly, there may be some cultural dynamics at play there. But the thing is a lot of times the frustrations in that shared space are the same. And so I got to think that part of your strategy is getting them to recognize their commonality in where their frustrations are. So what are those common frustrations that regardless of that dynamic that they all have in common that you can build, a basis for making this improvement around?
So the deeper the pain point, the easier it is to do. The biggest frustration is I can't find what I need. Literally, I can't find what I need. And so if you can't find what you need, it leads to so many inefficiencies. Leadership sees it. The frontline staff feel it. So it's not a hard sell.
All right. So there's also got to be several different scenarios. You described, especially in that tri-state area, a lack of space just based on population density. And there's only so much land to be had. You can't just keep going out. You got to go up and you can only go so far up without really just completely redoing the entire, you're going to tear it down to go up at some point, right? So that brings up really, I think, 3 different areas. And you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm thinking, there's a whole new space, right? So we tore it down, we're building it up, and it's like the Bionic Man. We're going to make it bigger and faster and stronger and more efficient and more productive. But a lot of times what you're really probably talking about is a renovation, but that's still pretty costly. I'm thinking on a smaller level, there's also just some redesigns, taking the space that you have and knowing that you're not going to be committing a lot of capital on this project, so let's just maximize what we got. Is that really the 3 different kind of ways that you would approach space optimization?
Yes. And a lot of the work falls under that 3rd category, which is there's not a lot of capital. There's not a lot of new hospitals being built in the tri-state area. And with the pandemic, that's just kind of magnified. So they're doing more with exactly what they have. But the ideal situation is when you have a brand new building and you're able to incorporate the 5S on the front end, because that can be used as a change management tool, a transition strategy. And it's easier because an empty building has no one in it to interfere with the design and the implementation. Once patient care is up and running, you have the additional layer of having to work around patient care without interrupting that workflow while you're working with the clinicians. It's a lot easier to do when you have an empty building, nothing's moving. You get it all in there. Everyone's aware of the education and the training going in. And everybody knows on day one when you operationalize the space what to do.
So how do renovation and redesign differ from each other? Or is renovation a little bit closer to new space? Because I got to think with a reno, you still don't have that everybody's out of the way scenario, right? You're like kind of borrowing space over here so that you can reno over here, and you're bouncing around through that whole process. Which one does renovation fall closer to, new space or redesign?
I think renovation falls closer to new space because, like you said, they are building something, but you are using swing space to move all the supplies while they are constructing something that would meet the need more, or be able to install the storage solution that would maximize the volume and the capacity of that space.
So how do you manage expectations with redesign? Because I'm thinking, all right, we found this common frustration. Everybody's rallying around it. With the new space or a reno, maybe sky's the limit in terms of the improvements that you can make. In a redesign, do you have to set expectations a little bit so that people don't end up feeling disappointed because they couldn't get everything that they wanted because they're constrained in some way?
Yes. And when we just do a redesign and we're working in the same space, sometimes they might get a few storage solutions, but really what they end up getting is just more visual management, a clearer path of communication to escalate supply shortages. They will get things allocated to, for the things that go together in the categories. So they're already happier in the sense that they have a say. A lot of times the frontline staff don't have a say. And at a minimum, when you're doing any redesign work, it's all their say because it's what they're going to dictate, and what they're going to design is going to be from them, and they're not dealing with a lot of money. So they have to incorporate what they feel is going to make the most impact, especially from a visual point of view, which is why the visual management piece of the 5S is important.
I'm thinking about this 5S project, and I'm flashing back to a room that's ready to go, whether it's a reno or not, and it's a single plane or a biplane new cath lab. I'm thinking about the vendors. So Monique, how much, and I'm not just talking about like the capital piece. I'm talking about, you've got construction capital, you've got electrical capital, you've got a whole nother piece. How much are the vendors as part of this? Is this more internal, or do you bring in the vendors when you need them to be a part of it? Suppliers, distributors, those entities?
So it's mostly internal, but there's times when we need creative storage solutions. And so we'll work with a lean vendor who can craft a storage solution that's specific to their space. And it's happened before. We've had to outfit the inside of a cabinet with a pull-down storage solution so that it can meet the height requirements, the ADA height requirements of the staff who are not tall enough to get to those cabinets, but they need to optimize that space so they can access supplies. So we'll partner with the lean manufacturers who are willing to work with us to meet the need of that space.
Just a little follow-up question to that. How often are they aware of the 5S? Is it new concept to them, or are they on board? Do they get it?
The lean manufacturers have heard of it before, but when you're just dealing with other manufacturers who just maybe have high-density storage solutions, they're not familiar. But then once we install their solution and they see the after pictures, then they understand the whole concept and why it was so important to install it.
And I love the point of your before and after pictures. It's almost like a white paper study. You got to know what it looked like before and what it's going to be at the end. That shows progress, and that's something you can hang your hat on too as a team. So really cool.
And I think that's the most satisfying thing for the staff. It's that it's immediately visual, right? So if you got it right, you'll see it right away. And if you got it wrong, you'll see it right away. And then you can say, okay, this needs a little more tweaking before we can call this a completed project.
Monique, I'm sitting here thinking it'd be great to have my kids' rooms under this 5S program. But my question really is, say you come in and do this to, some hospital in Topeka, Kansas, and they love it. It works great. But do you have to come back and kind of, every so often make sure they're doing it right and they hadn't gone back to their old ways?
Well, that's the point of the program under the last S, which is the sustainment, right? Because there's a physical sustainment in the room. So we leave tools in the room to help them audit the space to maintain it. But then there's also a number of operational metrics that are specific to the environment of care. And so you can create a dashboard of the metrics that affect that space. And when you see them over time deteriorating, that's when you're like, hey, I need to go back and revisit what happened in that space. Do we have a new program? Is there a new volume of patients? Do we change the patient census? It's a visual trigger to help you understand, hey, something's going on in that space and I need to revisit it. And even if I'm long gone, the operational leaders of that space can look at those metrics and say, we need to revisit this. And hopefully by then they've already been empowered with the lessons of lean and the 5S framework that they can continue the work on their own.
Dashboarding is so key because you just need that summary to help guide you, down that path and to always be able to check back in. You mentioned a couple of common considerations. We talked about culture and you really talked about how to engage, for that change management process to be successful. But something else that you told me about before the interview when we first got introduced was applied learning, and that was a major part of the considerations as you're getting ready to launch a project like this. How does applied learning fit into this?
Well, the applied learning reinforces something that you had in class. So it's one thing to sit through a training for an hour and a half and see the different, concepts being presented. It's another thing about internalizing those concepts by saying, okay, so guys, today we're sorting. So now let's go into that supply room and we're going to distinguish between what you guys really need and what you don't need. So adults, based on statistics, they learn through applied learning. So the process of the 5S that I conduct applies the learning, not only the in-class, but then the physical applied learning in the spaces. So it sticks with them and they remember it and they internalize it.
That's a key piece of that sustainability conversation. All right. As we get to the end here, can you tell us about a successful project? Can you describe, I know we can't see pictures on a podcast, and
Sure.
if we could, we'd just show a before and after and everybody would go, duh. But tell us about one.
Sure. So I think one of my favorite projects was a new hospital in New York City that they designed. It was a 386-bedded hospital. And I had the opportunity to do the 5S program moving into the hospital. So let's talk about the supplies. We had a mock-up space where people were able to pilot new technology. They were able to do training, discuss the workflows. I had the same opportunity to train staff in that space on how we were going to transition all the supplies to the new hospital and the equipment. So since we're talking about supplies here, I think a really cool exercise that I did was I had a room that was about 150 feet. I put up magnetic wallpaper and I had over 40 to 60 clinicians, teams from infection prevention and control, regulatory, IT, the nurses, and we put on the walls magnetic labels that had all the supply chain items. And I had the entire team for a couple of hours classify. They came up with their 5S categories on how they're going to access these products. And they classified all those magnets into those categories. And they laid out how the ideal layout would be. Since the new building had standardized supply rooms, we were able to take that formula and run it up the entire 18 floors. So If I'm a nurse on the 5th floor, I can run up to the 18th floor and I'm going to see the same exact thing. So it helps with that learning, that muscle memory. And so to outfit a whole brand new building with the 5S program, and everyone loved it. It was organized. It came from the team. They decided everything. We had some fun with those magnets on the wall. I think that was one of the most successful projects because it's still in place today and it's sustaining. And supply chain was a huge partner in that because they were the ones who, once they had the recipe, they went into the rooms understanding the patient census, and they laid out every room in the same, methodical order around the room that the team had come up with during that training session.
That is so key. I mean, just not only can I find what I'm looking for, but can I find it consistently anywhere that I go in the hospital? And that variation is a real challenge. I mean, having worked as a nurse, and it's been many, many years, and I've worked in multiple different settings, but you could be in one department and go into the supply room and it's completely laid out totally different. And, I remember just trying to go get toothpaste for a patient and it would be in two totally different places. And I might work on one unit, most of the time, but then I'd float over to another unit and everything would be so different. So that's a really interesting point. And I think it's pretty critical. Do you do any kind of webinars or do you have trainings that you've done? I can imagine these before and after pictures or a website. Where can we point people in your direction to learn more?
Sure. So I definitely have a website, and it could be viewed at www.c5si.com. As I mentioned before, a lot of the training that I do is applied learning, so it's on site, but I am in the process of maybe doing some remote videos to help introduce the concept. But the way my program runs is that it's applied learning. So I'm teaching you and then you're applying it. That's how it goes for the change management piece.
I think there's a lot of opportunity in this area right now, and just anything you can do to kind of make everybody's lives a little bit easier. I did an interview for one of the other podcasts that we do, and we talked with a workforce kind of predictive modeling company, and they do a lot of research. And one of the things that they were saying, for an organization to really stand out with these workforce shortages that are going to be ever present in years and years to come, that culture, that work environment, that was going to become one of the most important factors in retaining and being able to recruit quality staff. And so, I can see where this optimization really fits in to a lot of that cultural piece as well. And that consistency, everybody can really get around that. All right, Monique, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. This was an amazing episode. It went by super fast. You did a phenomenal job.
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
you so much, guys. It's been an hour? Oh, my God.
That was Monique Albornoz, principal owner at 5S Space Innovations, and, organization. And, Garry made a really good point, Hays, about maybe we could have her come over and renovate my house. But I think after we wrapped, she said, if I had $1 for everybody who said that, because you know what? It is difficult, but sometimes keeping our home organized rolls over into our work life because we're just as crazy busy at work, and that standardization or the lack of standardization can cause such a challenge. And so having a change management process that engages everybody. And then I love that part about applied learning to really set everything up for sustainability. So key.
Oh, absolutely. And everybody working from home now, it is important to keep your your home life a little structured. But if she went to Garry's house, oh my Lord, it would take her weeks to do that. But I don't think we have enough money for that. But anyway, yeah, she was fantastic. She talked about all the challenges of renovation and obviously new space and obviously what, the advantages you can get from it. So I really, really, really enjoyed that.
Well, maybe we could just subsidize that renovation. Instead of charging Garry to come on the podcast, we could just put that money towards, doing that redesign of his home office, Hays. What do you think?
Well, I'm telling you, if you can see what we saw here, guys, it would take it'd take a 1-800 we got junk truck or two to get this done.
Well, there's a reason that the podcast is only audio. That's going to do it for this week's show.
Thanks, everybody.
As a reminder, you can help support Power Supply by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or just search for Power Supply on your favorite podcast application. We've also got bonus content for certain episodes. All you got to do is download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. Hey, and while you're there, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. On behalf of Garry, Hays, and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.